Well, welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming today. I think we'll probably get started here. If a few folks come on in late, I think we can all turn and laugh at them. No, just kidding. We'll just let them sit in the back. Welcome to Breaking News. I really wanted to have the Breaking Bad symbol with but some copyright issues prevented that. So we're not gonna try and push that envelope. But thanks for coming. This is a panel discussion about how news content is an important part of the university's story. And today's discussion is going to focus on how to identify stories, experts, elements in your colleges and units, your areas of the university, to score headlines in local and regional and maybe even the national media. My name's Steve Smith, for those of you who don't know me. I'm the news director here at UNL, and I'll be moderating today's panel. We have some excellent folks from our campus who can discuss their philosophies on news and how they work to get their stakeholders or themselves into the public eye, in front of the public eye. So without further ado, let's meet our panel. To my right here immediately is Wheeler Winston Dixon. And Wheeler is the Ryan Professor of Film Studies at UNL. He's an internationally recognized scholar and writer of film history, theory, and criticism. He's the author of about 7,000 books and more than 70 articles on film. And he appears regularly in the national media, and that's really why Wheeler is here, to talk about how he kind of punches through that membrane and gets into the media and builds his own kind of personal brand, basically. So he's a really great example, and I hope he can talk from a faculty sense. Okay, you're going to try. That's all we can ask. We consider Wheeler what we call a perpetual placement. That is, we don't have to do a lot of work with him anymore. He's become recognized in his field as an expert, and people seek him out instead of us having to constantly push him. So I'd like to, hopefully Wheeler can talk a little bit about how that has occurred over the years.
Good shot.
To his right, Molly Brummond. And Molly Brummond is Assistant Dean of Student and Alumni Relations and Annual Giving to the University of Nebraska College of Law. Molly is, I would say, she's a tireless advocate for her college's faculty. And some of the faculty over there are preeminent experts in their field, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about some of those folks and how Molly has worked with them and the media and UCOM to get those people into the media, and how she watches headlines and watches trends in the media to get her folks out there. To her right is Vicki Miller. As many of you know Vicki. She's the Director of Research Communications in the Office of Research and Economic Development. Vicki is a veteran newswoman who handles many, many tasks, and I'm not sure if I got enough manys in there, Vicki. In a world where UNL's reputation is often measured by how our research is perceived, Vicki is just a master of breaking down the daunting nature of some of these scientific stories. And so Vicki can talk a little bit about how that can be done, because those things can be intimidating, and Vicki's a master at, like I said, at breaking those down. She's great at raising UNL's research profile nationally, locally, and internally, too. And last we have Mekita Rivas, who is a communications associate with the School of Natural Resources. Mekita, in less than a year on the job, has established herself as a prolific news gatherer and a storyteller at SNR. Whether it's a story about faculty research, a classroom feature, or a personality profile, Mekita just knows how to seek out and deliver a lot of different types of news for many different types of audience. So let's welcome our panel. I'd like to start by giving each panelist a chance to further introduce themselves and maybe just give a few thoughts about their role and what they do. So, Wheeler, you want to start?
Okay, well, we're supposed to do this because they're recording this, so we have to drag the mic over here. So my name is Wheeler Winston Dixon. My field is film studies, and basically what I concentrate on is national placement as opposed to local placement of stories. I accomplished that really through having a blog, which is quite visible and which is on the New York Times blog roll. And I update that with content on a regular basis. I mean, 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. I also have written a lot of books. I've written a lot of articles. I edit a magazine along with Gwendolyn Foster called Quarterly Review of Film and Video. And so I keep myself out there is really basically it. But I'm not chained to the computer. It may surprise you to know that I don't have a cell phone. It may surprise, and I'm totally opposed to them, seriously, because when I'm thinking, I want to think and I don't want to be interrupted. It may surprise you to know that I don't have a Twitter account, and also that I'm directly opposed to Facebook, okay? I will have nothing to do with these data mining operations, okay? But at the same time, the people I am in contact with are the people who are in the print media, and they contact me all the time. And there's also a great service called ProfNet, which asks you queries, and they just pop into my box every single day, and I respond to those. But the main thing that you need to do to get national placement, I've discovered, is really to be able to pithily, when reporters call you up, they're looking really for a pull quote. You know, they're looking for what they need. So if you spend a lot of time talking about something, you're going to dilute your impact, and you're actually going to decrease your chances of making it into the story. So I have a little trick that when somebody calls me up, for example, somebody called me up from the LA Times just a couple of days ago for a story about this producer who's trying to make a comeback. And so I do a little trick, and the trick is, okay, you know, I can talk only right now, even if that's not true. I say I can talk only right now because I have something I have to do almost immediately, and tomorrow is completely booked up. So you get me now or you get me not at all. So that establishes a sense of urgency right off the bat. And so then I say, okay, well, I have like about 10 minutes. What do you want to know? And so then I let them question me, and I give them as brief quotes as I can, and I get off the phone. Because I've discovered that that gives you a much higher success rate because you're giving them less to work with, it's more focused, and they think it's more valuable than if you're sitting here chatting with them for a half an hour. So that's really it. I mean, and film studies is, you know, is something that also, as I'm sure the rest of the panelists will tell you, you have to keep abreast of the field, and you have to know exactly what's going on. And of course, most of it now happens on the web. Print is really pretty much going away, much to my sorrow. But nevertheless, you know, the newspapers still publish, and they publish now online. So if you have to keep on top of these things, and so that's what I basically do. So we'll talk more later.
Okay. Hi, I'm Molly Brummond, and as Steve told you, I'm with the College of Law, and my role with the college has actually changed a little bit in the last few months. And for the last 3 years, I was the director of communications, which is how I started to work with Steve. And now I'm the assistant dean of student and alumni relations. But the one piece of communications that I retained was print, was news and media placement. And I guess I'm here to talk to you about just how you can help faculty members. And I would say that one of the advantages that I have is that I, too, am a lawyer. And so I know what our faculty, I have a pretty good understanding. I think it's important as communicators to do your best to have a really good understanding of what the areas of expertise are that your faculty have. Because then when you're, like when I'm looking at the kind of news developments, I almost immediately can identify who I can go to ask if they want to speak out on something, and if they want to be made available to the media. And we can do it preemptively as opposed to kind of trying to catch up once the story is already broken. So I'll leave it at that and let the other two introduce themselves, and I can talk more about that as the panel progresses.
I'm Vicki Miller, and I'm with the Office of Research. By way of introduction, I've been at the university a couple of years, and started out and did my first 18 years here as the science writer for the Institute of Ag and Natural Resources. I'm a newsie by training, worked for the AP, was the editor of some daily and weekly newspapers, before jumping ship and going into this side of the operation. But one of the things that I hope that I can perhaps help you with today is maybe we can visit a bit about the sometimes unique challenges that are involved with reporting research and trying to craft a story or news around something that most people know very little about. So I hope to visit a bit about that. For now, that's all you need to know.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mekita Rivas. I serve as the Communications Associate for the School of Natural Resources on East Campus. A nice way of putting it is I'm a one-woman news machine for the school, which houses 9 majors, 6 units, a little under 400 undergrad and graduate students, and over 100 faculty and staff. So even though it is a little overwhelming, it's also a very exciting and endlessly fascinating place to work and to have the school as a beat, because there's no shortage of news stories to mine from, and there's always something going on. So hopefully today I can help some people figure out how to sort of navigate the overwhelming, I guess, nature of working in a large department, and figuring out how to pick through the stories and prioritize them and, you know, get them the best play possible.
Thanks, guys. If anyone has a question in the audience as we're going, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll attempt to find you and call you out. If otherwise, you can tweet. Of course, you can tweet. Use the hashtag UNLSM for this, and Tyler there in the back will flag me down and read out the question. So if you're too shy to raise your hand, you can tweet. But I'll start with, you know, kind of maybe an obvious question, and I'll just throw it out to the panel, whoever wants to grab this. How do you know when something is newsworthy? What elements in your mind, you know, make up a research study or a classroom feature, or for Wheeler, you know, for something you're doing that's notable enough that you think rises to the level of news? You know, I'm thinking noteworthy versus newsworthy. There's a big difference between noteworthy and what makes it into the news. So how do you know when something's newsworthy? Anybody want to take a crack at that one?
Well, you know, we used to call it the sniff test. Does anybody care? Is anybody out there? I love your explanation of noteworthy, because we work in a world where there are accomplishments that need to be noted, and we have some increasingly effective vehicles to do that. UNL Today, Scarlet, our social media, your college and department web pages and newsletters, etc. And then the whole issue of what's really news. And for me, the acid test is, does the rest of the world care about this? Must they know? And I have a fairly small range of must we knows. And then there's the other area, I'm afraid, that we all deal with, which is the news that we must tell people, right? And that perhaps that's the most challenging. But it really is, does anybody outside the folks who are immediately involved care about it? Is it a compelling story?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. You know, when I'm assessing a story's newsworthiness, I'm in turn assessing what its impact is potentially, and who it's going to reach and speak to in the long term. You know, is it just relevant for SNR, for East Campus, for the university community, for the city, state, and so forth? So I think the larger that potential impact is, the more newsworthiness it has, and therefore the more I'm going to prioritize it. You know, something that maybe is like a classroom feature or a student profile story, in those instances, I'm looking for a very unique footprint and, you know, an interesting story that's never been told before. You know, what makes this student special? What makes this class interesting or one of a kind? And, you know, if it hasn't been told before, I want to tell that story. Or if it hasn't been a while, I want to follow up on it. So those are sort of some of the things that I look for in newsworthiness.
All right. I think that the most useful thing for me, quite frankly, is my blog, because and the blog, there are a lot of blogs, but mine's been around for about 4 or 5 years. And then I was lucky enough that Dave Carr, who used to work for the New York Times and now who works for the Museum of Modern Art as a film curator, liked it so much that he put it on the New York Times blog roll, and then it really took off. So now I'm getting about 20,000 hits a day. But what I do is I only write about the stuff that I want to write about. I don't write about something because it's necessarily in the news, you know. And so there's a wide range of things. So I'm not sort of chasing the news, you know, which is a destructive way to approach it. The other thing, of course, that I guess I wanted to note is that when you're dealing with the national media, it doesn't really do much good to pitch yourself, because they're not really interested in you. They're interested in your ideas, if they will fit into their story. And you also have no idea what they're going to pick and choose of whatever you tell them, how you're going to be represented. So I found, quite frankly, that I publish mostly my articles online in various different journals, like Film International and stuff. And so people read those and contact me, or they read my blog or whatever. But it's getting yourself out there, so that then people will then call you up for various different ideas about films. And my area, of course, is film studies and things like that. Lately, I've been doing a lot of work on streaming, because streaming media, of course, is the way that everything is now being delivered. And I just wrote a book called Streaming, in fact, last year, which has gotten a lot of good press. So I get a lot of questions about that. So the question is, you have to get your material out there, and you have to let people know it. And at the same time, you can't really push yourself. You have to be available. But at the same time, you have to sort of have some kind of distance, so they're reaching out to you, because then you're more valuable.
So a couple of different things come to mind. One thing that I've worked really hard at is to develop really good relationships with the faculty members with whom I work. And when they have books published, or they have an article that's published, I make sure that we do our best to push it out, at least into the streams within the university community, so that they are at least recognized within the university community. And then if there are different you know, kind of trade publications, if there's other ways that I can promote those sorts of things, then I do that. And what that has helped me do is develop just a really good level of rapport with people, because then they kind of tell me how they see the news developing. And then I know what to be watching for, and I know what expertise they can bring to it, and I can try and make matches in that way. So that's kind of from the faculty perspective. And from the college perspective, since I have been at the College of Law, there's been tremendous pressure on law schools nationwide, just because the number of people taking the LSAT and even considering law schools are going down nationwide, and so the competition for students is really fierce. And so when that's your story, that helps you think, it helps me frame what I think is newsworthy, because we're looking at ways that differentiate us from the law schools that we're competing against. And so, for instance, we're the only law school in the Big Ten, and really one of the only public law schools that requires our first-year students to take an international law course. So that's a big deal. But I don't know that it would have necessarily been something that I was really, really pushing if I hadn't have been thinking about it through this frame of what differentiates us from all of our competitors. And that one overarching kind of framework is how I figure out what's newsworthy, because that is what the dean and really the faculty, we need students, and we need to compete hard for students, and so our placements need to be about what the college is doing that's kind of cutting edge and innovative. And so I'm looking at, not only does that shape my messaging and help me figure out what's newsworthy, it also helps me determine what kinds of publications I need to have those placements in, because I don't know a lot. I don't know if our audience, the 22-year-olds that we're trying to recruit, are reading the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. It would be great if they were, but chances are they're reading the National Jurist or Pre-Law magazine, and so a placement that's for some of the stories that I'm trying to frame, that is of more value to me at this time than maybe something else. And communicating that clearly to the dean is also something that I'm constantly doing.
It's in our office, when we're thinking and evaluating what is news, whether we pursue something, we often use 3 words. Is it the first? Is it the best? Is it the only? And so that's something that I think kind of you're talking about here, about how we are differentiating ourselves from the rest of the country. First, best, only. Those are 3 quick guideline words that we often use. Vicki, you deal with stories related to research funding more than probably anyone on campus. And as she smiles as I say that. Are there special challenges, considerations that we need to keep in mind when we're preparing stories for big grant announcements? I know there are folks in this room that have, had to think about how to prepare for those kinds of news stories. And what do we have to consider in those situations?
Well, first of all, thank you to all of you folks who take on the task of trying to get a well-timed grant announcement story out there. I think the first thing that, and probably the most important, is timing. And by that I mean it is not unusual for one of our faculty to receive an email from a program officer at a federal funding agency saying, hey, we're gonna fund your project. And they are understandably really excited, and they email their dean and their department head, and we're off to the races. And so, for example, Sherry gets an email and it says, woohoo, look at this, big win, get that news out there. And we're good, we're good reporters and communicators, and we're going to do that for them. And I would just ask one thing: check with us first. And most of the folks, I may be preaching the choir here, but it's the note from the program officer, while exciting news, is not the official grant notice, and we can't announce our grants publicly until they are actually awarded. And so Ashley Washburn, my colleague in research communications, and I would be happy if you have a question, if somebody comes to you, just say, hey, we'll check. And we can check that fairly quickly for you. And if there's something uncertain in the listing, we can check with the director of sponsored programs, and we can get you an answer pretty quickly. So at the worst, you have to say, hey, this is great news, but we need to wait a little while. So the timing issues is sort of routine, but not only as long as we do it. If we don't do it, we get calls from funders saying, we haven't given you that grant, and we may not do that now. So we never want that to happen. A couple of other thoughts on the whole grant announcing funding. I'm a news person, so to be honest, it's better news in my mind when we can talk about the outcome of work. So, we got this funding, and now we've done this that makes a difference, and what the impact is. That almost always makes a better story. But there are times when we need to tell the other story. There are a few times, rare, but a few times when the size of the grant or the potential that it allows us is the news itself. So if we get a $10 million grant and we can open a new a center that we have not had before, that's big news. But still, always, really, it's what will we be doing for the greater good with that money? My boss, Prem Paul, always says it's not about the money. It's about what the money allows our faculty to do. So those are a couple of rules. The other thing that I'd mention real quickly is that there's not a one-size-fits-all number for grants. We still apply the news rule. I mean, is this newsworthy? And I know that's the toughest one for you all, for all of us, because it sure is newsworthy to faculty A who just got this grant. And all grants are important because they further the mission of the university, but sometimes they're more noteworthy than newsworthy. And that's where we do kind of a delicate dance with our faculty and with our administrators. But I do want to note that all grants aren't created equal. So somebody in physics gets a $200,000 grant from NSF. That is great news. probably not newsworthy. I mean, it's a relatively small amount of money in the hard sciences. Someone in history or English gets a $200,000 grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. That's a big deal. I mean, seriously, it's not fair, life isn't fair, but there's a real inequity, as Wheeler will certainly attest, in the available funds for scholarship and research across disciplines. So, you know, if you have a question about that, don't hesitate to ask. We're here to try to sort that out. I wish I had a magic rule that if it's this, then this triggers this. I don't. I would just caution, I think, in general, that there is a fatigue level that will pop up fairly quickly in the media with Yahoo Grant of the Week kinds of stories. And so we try in the Office of Research to limit those. The ones that we're responsible for, we try to pick our placements pretty carefully. And I guess if you all can think about it that way, I would encourage you to do so. But if nothing else, think about the story. What's the story? Is the story that you got this grant? The real story is what you can do with it. And our faculty are, you know, once you sit down and talk, this is their work. This is their life's work. We have incredibly bright, intelligent, hardworking people. And if you can sit down and talk with what they do about their life's work, they will tell you often a very fascinating human interest story. I want to reiterate Molly's point. The better you know your faculty, and the better they understand their relationship with you, the better off you're going to be. So success breeds success.
So that's a really good point. Any questions, first of all, from the audience? It might be a good time for anyone. Any thoughts?
So Molly, we were talking about placement. So there's some there's some in-house stories though you can tell, right?
Absolutely.
So when you talk about placement, so there's stuff you can put in-house and maybe like UNL today or you know your own college news stuff that are in-house newsworthy versus external.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And what I found is when I make sure to do those in-house things, that helps me build just a rapport with the faculty member because it communicates to them that I am working for you. I want your success to be known. And so as a result of that, they are more likely when something happens to come right to me to let me know. And so I have found that just by taking the steps to make sure that things get to Steve or to UNL Today or submit something to the Scarlet or you know make sure that it's communicated to the person that runs our website or I mean all of those things. I mean we have an internal college newsletter communicating to the student that their professor was you know, an article was accepted for publication. All of those things just breed rapport. And then the result of that rapport is just a clear exchange of information and more likelihood that I'm going to find out right away what's going on.
So do you also use the same philosophy of newsworthy first, or do you use that same principle?
Yeah.
In-house?
Yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, you kind of. I think probably for every college or department, it's probably different. But you kind of. It doesn't take long to kind of to develop kind of a gut reaction to. Yes, this is kind of the process that we follow.
You know, that's a good point, Molly. You've been there how long now?
3.5 years.
Okay, yeah, and you were a lawyer, so you kind of had an in with the other lawyers, right?
Yeah, well, yeah,
so,
I mean,
so
yeah.
We've got Mekita, who's been here less than a year. Am I shortchanging your time, your tenure here?
No, less than a year,
Okay.
about 7 months.
So how do you build rapport? How do you know, because I was national news editor before this, which Leslie Reed does now, and I would approach some professors, and they'd be like, nah, I don't want to deal with the media. It's kind of demeaning. I'd rather write for my my fellow professors. That's the audience I want. And you know, how do you build this rapport?
You know, I think you kind of have to prove yourself with the content that you produce. That's a lesson that I have learned and am learning. I've definitely experienced some aversion and disinterest in, faculty sharing their work. I think it comes from a spotlight shyness at times. I've noticed that some faculty members in the hard sciences are just very focused and dedicated to their work, and the last thing they want to do is answer questions from a pesky communicator. So, I've learned to not take that so personally, and I've also realized that having a sample story or press release to provide them with, if they are a little hesitant, is really helpful, because it kind of demonstrates and gives them an idea of what you're hoping to create for them, how this piece of media can help them and advance their work or research. So being able to showcase, hey, here's an article I've already written, kind of similar, this is what I'm hoping to create for you, I want to get your work out in the media, I think sort of decreases their hesitance a little bit. It's important to make it less about you as a person. This is about you and your work. And I think when you phrase it that way, they're a lot more open-minded and a lot more willing, and that rapport sort of starts to build. I would say my last line of defense is ringing in my boss, the director, so he can kind of give them the little nudge that they need if they don't want to work with me.
It's a constant struggle. I think we have a little bit of Nebraskan and all. Although we're all from different places, we kind of have that, aw shucks, it's not really that big a deal.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
Because lawyers are not.
Okay, I take it back.
I mean, what I found when I started was a real, I think that generally my impression is, anyway, that academics are hesitant sometimes to talk to me, but lawyers are also really hesitant to talk to me because they don't want to be taken out of context. And so once I determined that that was one of the biggest barriers, Steve came over and we had a brown bag lunch and media training with some just basic rules. And once we did that, then there was a little, the barrier came down a little bit. And then when we had because the law touches everything, right? And so it would drive me nuts when we have the pipeline discussion happening, and we have Sandy Zelmer, who is a water law expert and just natural resource expert, and we're not getting the call to talk about that. That would drive me just crazy. So the media training helped, because then it was what Steve says is come up with your 3 points and just have them in front of you and come back to them. Come back to those 3 points. Every question that they ask, just come back to one of the 3 points that you want to make. And so then people felt a little more like they were prepared, that they weren't going to get taken out of context. And so that barrier came down a little bit. And then once we had people start to get placement and then get recognition from the internal sources, well, then the gloves were off, and it was like this competitive thing, because my faculty is very competitive with each other.
And that's what we want to get to, right? We want to get to that place.
Yeah.
Well, I want to reiterate a couple of points there, and I think Wheeler hit it right on the head when he started talking about this notion of less being more. That's one of the things I really emphasize with researchers when they're doing interviews, is that have those 3, I know your 3 points. Within those 3 points, figure out ways to say the same thing 3 different ways. Really, so that sooner or later, somebody's going to snag onto the soundbite, and every one they grab, because as Wheeler points out, you have no control. You don't know what you say they're going to snag. So staying on message is really important. That's sometimes a bit harder, I think, for hard scientists, because they really, really want to explain this to you.
They can change the world. They can change the world if they just give them 2 hours. Yeah.
And I believe it's in about 50, how long is a class period? 55 minutes, 50 minutes? Yeah. And so they need more help. And the truth is, because film is, because I go to movies.
Right.
I have hired an attorney. I have never laid a nano layer on graphene. Okay? And to be honest, that took me a really long time to know what that meant. So there are unique challenges. But one of the things I see, I see reluctance, but now I also see the opposite, which is kind of problematic, and it's that everybody has a great story to tell, and they want you to tell it now. Yeah. And you know, not like grants, not all stories are created equal. So that goes back to this great tool, the tools that we have on campus to help people, to celebrate people's successes, right? And I can tell you that because of what Molly does, I happened to notice some work that Sandy was doing that I otherwise wouldn't have known about. So believe me, when something's in UNL today, it's not just a pat on the back to your faculty member, although that's important, by the way. But other folks do hear about it, and you know, maybe somebody who's working in natural resources on research will say, "Oh, I want to collaborate with Zelmer." Sure. And you know, that's a win-win for everybody.
I guess. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, just had a quick question. All of you have been talking about how less is more and not chasing stories and all that, and it seems like it comes down to having an identity. But how do you go about forming that identity when it comes to communications? Because what you're going to put out there, a lot of times is going to be how people see you and how you represent it. So you got to have a strong identity first, and how you go about that.
Well, I think that one of the most important things is you have to have, first off, a professional web page. You have to have something that looks reasonably slick, and you can't do it yourself. So that's the one thing. So you have to have that. But I think it's also going back to what Vicki was saying. You can control what appears to be with you in the press if you keep the whole thing completely laser focused. And if you just repeat the thing over and over again. And getting yourself out there is really a matter, I think, of doing the work and then making sure that that work is, in my field, is placed in as many online publications as possible, and at the same time not behind paywalls. You know, I'm not really involved in this to make a lot of money. I'm involved in film because film is my passion, and film history, theory, and criticism. I'm production, I know all about, and I've done it, but I'm really interested in, in how film works with society, and of course right now the momentous digital shift, which everything is, film is going away, everything's going digital, and there's all kinds of great stories about that, like the largest camera rental house in Los Angeles, Burns & Sawyer, just sold off all their film cameras because nobody's using them anymore. Everything is digital, and the studios are destroying their 35mm prints. So, every time that you get some information like that, then you can put that in a blog or you can put that in an article, and I publish a couple of times a week, and so then when you do that, then you get out there. But I guess one thing I wanted to talk about with Vicki is sort of what I call the etiquette of responding to these things. At this point, what happens to me, quite frankly, is that you just put out a lot of content and people say, well, I read something here and I read something there, so maybe you'd like to have something to say about that, right? So then using all the previous rules, keep it very focused, make sure that your stuff is perceived as valuable. But again, you can't contact them. But after they've contacted you, there's several things. Respond immediately. I check my computer like 3 or 4 times, maybe 5 times a day. And if somebody gets something, I will respond immediately. Even if I'm not going to comment, I'll respond immediately and say, sorry, I really can't do this, but thank you for thinking of me. And in the future, if you have something that would be more along my lines, maybe we can get back together again, and I appreciate your interest, right? But also after the interview, I immediately shoot off a follow-up email in which I have my complete block of contact information, how I would like to be referred to, the fact that I'm with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
Very important point right there.
Exactly right there. Yeah, because I can't tell you how many times even the local papers have screwed my name up because it's Wheeler, Winston, Dixon. So I've been Winston, Dixon, Wheeler. You know what I mean? And so the thing is that, so what I do is I always send them the block afterwards and I say, here's the block. please use this. This is my name. This is how I wish to be referred to, right? And send me a link, right? And then that gets an established thing going. And I keep a file, a separate file of all the media contacts. But I found that going back to them and saying, well, would you be interested in a story on something, doesn't work. You have to more or less be out there, create the work, and create sort of where people will say, well, he'll have a quote about that, and then they'll go for it. And then you just give them the quote, and that's it. But the main thing is you really got to put yourself out there, you know, and that's really it. But I think one thing I was thinking about when you were talking about the fact that you're a lawyer is you also have to be very careful about what you say.
Yes.
You know, you really have to, I mean, there's lots of stories that I turned down because a reporter, and that's another thing, if a reporter, particularly in film, and I don't know how much this is in the hard sciences, but if they will suddenly start talking about something like Woody Allen, and then they'll go into scandal territory, right?
Yes.
You know, and I say, well, I don't have anything to say about that. You know, I really don't know anything about that. You know, I can't say anything about it. But the worst thing that you can say is no comment, because no comment means you've got a comment, but you're withholding it.
Holding it.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that what I try to say is, I really don't know anything about that. You know, and that just shuts them right down, because if I don't know anything about that, I just keep repeating it. That's it. So you really have to be careful. There's a great book called Say It Safely, which is a very old book, but it's a very useful book, and it tells you how to avoid traps like that. So there's all kinds of things to consider.
You know, it's a good question because.
So how successful are you in maybe changing the subject? So somebody comes to you and they want to talk about XYZ, and you don't really want to talk about XYZ. Is it possible to pivot and kind of say, oh, look at this?
No, if they want to, you know, entertainment media is totally different from what you guys are doing, so it's a different thing. But I mean, like, for example, there are certain sites that I won't even talk to, like TMZ. If you know what TMZ is, 3 Mile Zone, right, which is all a gossip news media thing, I'm not even going to talk to them. Forget it. I mean, I just flush their queries just like that, because they're just interested in gossip and scandal, and I have no interest in being associated with that. So, but if that's what they want to talk about, you're not going to get them to talk about something else. I mean, you know, like TMZ is not interested in Woody Allen's movies, and they're not interested in, you know, anything he did, or they're not interested in, you know, they're only interested in scandal. So in that case, you just stay away from it, and then you brand yourself as someone who won't be associated with those sorts of publications.
Or coming from the University of Nebraska, too.
Right, exactly, and it's very useful. It's very useful.
Yeah.
Very useful.
You know, the question, you know, is it kind of sort of highlights what's happened in higher ed and higher ed coverage in the last, I don't know, you can go back 40 years, 50 years, where I think University of Illinois actually did a study on this that showed 50 years ago, most media outlets talked about universities. Now, higher ed coverage is smart guy has smart opinion. Can we go talk to him about something? Right? The Larry Sabato thing, where he's always on CNN talking about who's going to win the election. So how do you guys leverage that? You know, now you have to have personal brands for each professor, and I think that kind of gets to the point. You got all these different personalities on campus. How do you make sure that UNL is represented in those, or your college is represented in them? What kind of tips and tricks do you have to, besides beating them overhead and say, make sure you say you're from the University of Nebraska?
Well, one of the things I talk to both faculty and to our students about is, you know, you already have a personal brand. You just haven't maybe thought about it as a personal brand. And so what I tell people is, you know, you need to sit down and think about what your brand is and identify the things that you can do to support that brand. So Wheeler touched on your professional website and making sure that that is current. And so Vicki just gave me the highlight of my week by saying that that our faculty website pages were all current, because now all of our faculty are thinking about that as part of their brand and one of the many tools that they have. When we talk to faculty members, we talk about, you know, do you want to have a blog? Do you want to be on Twitter? Do you have a LinkedIn profile? You know, all of those things. I mean, even Wheeler's response that he gives to the reporters, that is a part of his brand, because they know that they can count on him. He's communicating something to them by doing that. So everybody has a brand. It's just whether or not you've put any like time into kind of thinking about what it is you want to be sure that you're communicating through that brand.
I have a question. I was wondering, when you're just getting started, because I don't know what everybody in the room does, but I know for us in biological sciences, we don't have a lot of time. We have 5 minutes for the website, we have 5 minutes for something else, and that's it, in addition to our other duties. So I'm just wondering, when we're just getting started on this, where do we want to start? Do we want to focus on the website? Do we want to write stories? What's the best way to even get started with this? Because having a brand is awesome. But where do you start?
Well, can I just respond to that? Why do you mean you only have 5 minutes?
Because it's just one portion of our job where we do so many other things. It's
Well,
just
I think we all do. I guess I'm going to say I think you have more time than you have, or else you're going to have to multitask. You know what I mean? I mean, because it's this morning, I mean, you know, yesterday I wrote an article, this morning I do blog entries, also I'm teaching, I'm here lecturing and stuff like that. You have to pack more in your day. The whole thing has sped up to a ridiculous rate. I mean, my favorite show right now is a show called At Midnight, which probably many of you probably never even heard of. It's just At Midnight, okay? And it moves at a pace which is just blinding. It's on Comedy Central, and it's after Colbert and Stewart, okay? And it's at midnight, and it comes on, and the guy's opening intro is, it's 11:59 and 59 seconds, and now it's at midnight. And that's the speed at which it moves. So in order to do this sort of thing, you have to be prolific, you have to create an enormous amount of content, and you have to do it consistently and all the time. But you have to love what you're doing, right? I mean, if I didn't enjoy doing the work that I'm doing, then it wouldn't be, you know, if I can't write to order, I can't write about things that I don't want to write about. But the main thing is that you have to put some content out there, and you have to learn how to also what I call manuscript management. In other words, I'm the only one who can write my stuff, but other people can type it, right? I handwrite everything. So other people can type it. People can do the tech work on my blogs. People can do the tech work on my websites. So as long as I provide the content, right, then what other people do to format that for me and stuff like that, which is not that expensive. This is the other thing. I mean, I don't know if any of you know about a site called Fiverr. Does anybody here know about Fiverr? Okay. Fiverr does amazing gigs for $5 a pop. People will design websites, people will create software, people will do all kinds of things. As long as it's your content, having somebody else do the work of getting it out there for you is very useful. So, you know, and even though I don't tweet myself, I can hire other people to tweet for me. So, you know, it's really, you know, I think it's really a question of, you know, how you want to allocate your time. But I would say that it's just obvious to me that everything is speeding up to a place that's just, you know, and it's just going to get faster.
We had a question over here.
Get faster.
Sherry?
I was just going to ask Wheeler if he could come to the college business and say what he just said.
Well,
he does have a honorarium that
you can repeat it to them.
It's going to be on the web.
You can repeat it to them. But I mean, that's the thing that I've learned is that, you know, that it's really it's right. And of course now, you know what the kids are all saying, pics or it didn't happen.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, now nobody has any more time to read, right? So now the whole thing is Instagram, right? So that's really it. I mean, it's just you know, you really have to. I mean, it's a process of being continuously available and providing content continuously, but at the same time controlling the thing. So that's why I don't tweet, because I might say something stupid, right? Seriously, you know, I give myself time to think about it, right, and then I put it out. Right, so that I always try to maintain control of content, and that's why also I don't have a cell phone, so I have time to think.
I just wanted to touch on that too. Some of our faculty have had great success when we're talking about blogs or Twitter. Blogs, they'll use it as an opportunity to get a student involved. So Richard Moberly is one of our professors. He's an expert on national security law and whistleblowers. And so, I mean, he'll have one of his students say, and he has, you know, Google search terms that are set. So if there's an article that comes out that touches on one of his areas of expertise, you know, he gets it and he can assign it to a student and say, we should be blogging about this. Or he might see the article and he might just think, I don't want to blog about it, but I'm going to tweet this out and make sure that my followers, and all he tweets about are his areas of expertise. That's all he tweets about. He doesn't tweet about Nebraska football or any of that. It's just strictly his areas of expertise. And so the people that follow him, you know, are interested in what he has to say about that particular thing. But he uses students and uses it as a way to engage students and give them an opportunity to think about things the way to learn about how he's thinking about things.
Well, let me just jump
Vicki
in.
had a point quick before that. Sorry.
Yeah, excuse me. First of all, I wanted to go back to your question. Are you a faculty member?
Me?
Uh-huh. No. Are you a communicator?
I am the graduate recruitment coordinator.
And you do a lot of stuff?
Right.
Okay. So there may be a difference between how Wheeler can manage his day and how you can manage your day. What I would suggest is you sit down with whomever is your boss, whether it's the dean or your department head or your school chair, whatever, and say, you know, tell me what you want to have happen. Because if recruitment's the top priority, then that tells you a lot. If communicating on reaching students is top priority, there's a whole set of things to be done that I think you prioritize. If the the biggest deal is faculty recognition or promoting research, I mean those are different kinds of things. But if you're in that situation where you feel like you can't be all things to all people, I think you have to ask for guidance and try to match your efforts to the expectations. And Molly has talked about that. I think Sherry is someone who does a really good job of being tuned into her dean. So very quickly, I wanted to address that. Yeah. One other thing, and that is we talked about getting faculty to agree to do stories with us. There is a huge caution that I want to offer. Do not go out there and talk somebody into doing a news release with you who's not going to talk to the media when they call. As Wheeler said, you return those calls. And if you're not willing to take that time and do that, for goodness sakes, don't ask Leslie to promote it nationally, because all we're going to do is burn some bridges. So
see, and just jumping in on that, what that does is that only damages you, but it damages the university.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
basically, if you put somebody out there as a potential news source and they don't follow through, then that's not a good thing. But I wanted to jump into something that Molly was saying, and that is that Google Scholar is a really useful tool that you can Google yourself and see where you're being cited, so then you can see what other people are taking your material and then you creating new content out of that, so then you can respond to that content, right? So you can see what's going on, and also having search terms set up on Google search for topics that you're interested in is another thing. Also, you should also, of course, as a default, you should have a Google set up for yourself, so that you're constantly getting hits throughout the day, and you should adjust that so that it's giving you instantaneous feedback, not like feedback every 24 hours. You know, because 24 hours and you miss a news cycle. I mean, a news cycle's now in minutes. So it's really, you really have to respond. I mean, that really is the key.
And people used to say you have a one-day, it's a one-day story.
Right.
Now it's about a 12-hour story.
Now it's about a 15-minute
story. We have about 5 minutes left. Is there any other questions from the audience or any other thoughts? Yes? Good question. Thank you.
Hard scientists, by chance? The process that Mekita just explained, I think, is you're operating against type in those cases. I've had the opportunity to operate against type as a science writer most of the time. These are people who want to talk to their peers. They're very introverted. They're afraid of the media. I guarantee you, if you do a media training, every one of them has a horror story to tell. And so my rule is, when I do that, is we've all had bad experiences. We're here to make sure that doesn't happen again. So let's start there. And you can cover a lot more ground. But I do think one of the things is, if there's a significant story and it's going out locally or nationally, get a hold of Steve or Leslie, and people will sit down and actually talk to the faculty member and give them a little coaching. I mean, I wish we could train every new assistant professor who comes in at new faculty orientation. We can't. We need to do more of that. Steve and I have talked about it, but we can do some hand-holding at the time. Now, does that talk them into initially doing the story? Probably, maybe not. Maybe not. And we can't just say, well, we're going to work with the folks who like working with the media, because that cuts out a whole lot of really significant work that's underway at the university. But certainly, we don't want to call attention to somebody who's either unwilling or uncomfortable. I did an interview. It was a great story. I was just like so excited. It was a major breakthrough in biochemistry. I'm ready to go. And at the end, I said to this guy, hey, so if this all works out, tell me about the potential outcome. And he said, ma'am, don't trivialize my science by asking me to speculate on practical outcomes.
Right on.
And I said, sir, don't you ever say that to a real reporter, and you are a land-grant scientist. So we didn't do that story.
But you know, backing off what you're saying, I mean, picking up, just wanted to quickly comment that Einstein only said 2 words on film. In all of his entire career, there are only 2 words of him speaking on film. All he says is, I agree. That's it. That's it. And the newsreel crews were badgering him for years, and of course, obviously, he was big news for most of his life, but they could never get him to say anything. He refused to do all the interviews and everything, and the only thing in the march of time somebody would ask him this question, all he said was, I agree, and that's it. So, you know, again, that kind of reticence, I think that in that case, somebody like Steve or Leslie would go to that group of people and sit down with them and get their story and serve as some kind of a amanuensis, or, you know, some kind of a go-between to get them as a group, perhaps, to feel more comfortable telling the story to them and shaping it with them, and so that therefore then they would get that out to the national media.
And, you know, I chose this panel because I work with these people a lot. You know, these folks are all in their own way very good at engaging with university communications. It's no secret. And so what I've done is I put together a list of the news team, our contacts, for what we specialize in. I'm just going to set them up here. That's a big part of it, is making sure that, you know, we're looped in. Mekita was an intern at UCOM back in her undergrad days, and so she knows her way around UCOM. And, you know, like I said, really understands the platforms because of that, and how to get that news out from SNR. And if you look at from the moment when she was hired from SNR's, kind of, it just goes like this, the number of stories. So, I mean, she knows this sheet. She doesn't need this sheet, in other words. She knows what we do. So I'm just going to set this up here for those of you who don't know us. You know, there's been some changes in the last year or so in the news team. So I'll just put them up here. Let's thank our panel. They've been great.
Thank you.